Imagine a chunk of land larger than entire countries like Cyprus or Lebanon suddenly changing hands through one court decision. Well, you don't have to imagine it because it happened in Oklahoma, of all places, in 2020. In a historic win for the Native Americans, millions of acres, literally half the state, has been put under indigenous jurisdiction. Remind me to put a shocked Pikachu face here or something. I'm standing here in Canada, but just south of the border, the Muskogee Creek Nation made these headlines that reshaped history. It has since led to even more victories and unprecedented returns of vast areas of indigenous territory to indigenous nations they rightfully belong to. It's an act of something called land sovereignty. Land sovereignty for indigenous peoples isn't about scoring real estate deals, but about restoring a birthright, a deep connection to the land that's as rich in culture and language as it is in environmental kinship. It's like reclaiming a family heirloom that's been unfairly taken away. It's all happening under the umbrella of the land back movement. Some of you might be familiar with it, but as I learned from trying to craft this video, far too many people haven't. It's a movement, a demand, a historical tide turning, and it's all happening right now. I'm Tristan, here in the heart of Canada in London, Ontario. Before my ancestors set foot here, well actually in Quebec, in the 1600s, this land thrived under the care of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lunapewak, and Ottawaran peoples. These groups, each with their rich cultures and languages, have fostered a deep connection with this land. As a settler, I struggle to even do a half-decent pronunciation of these nations' names. Anishinaabeg. Their relationship with the land is profound. They see it as a living being, caring for it with respect and reciprocity. Like any good gardener, they know the soil, every plant, and have a relationship that goes way deeper than yield. Since my ancestors' arrival, this land has suffered violence, theft, and marginalization, pushing its rightful caretakers to forgotten, impoverished reserves. Land back goes beyond a plea for justice. It's a crucial step in mending centuries of wrongs and possibly our only chance to ensure our species' survival. This indigenous-led call for restitution seeks to shift from colonial ownership to communal stewardship. It focuses on environmental sustainability, cultural preservation, and self-governance. Land back is about empowering indigenous communities to decide their own fate, preserve their heritage, and ensure basic necessities like clean water and housing. In essence, it's a move towards decolonization and healing a fractured bond between people and the land. So, come with me on this journey into the heart of land back. We're going to debunk myths, address the legacy of dispossession, and maybe, just maybe, find a path towards healing. This isn't just my story as a settler. It's a narrative that weaves through our collective past, present, and future. It's about striving for justice, environmental balance, and a healthier world for everyone. So I want you to picture a world where the land beneath us is a living, integral part of our history, culture, and identity. For many indigenous communities, this is not a dream, but a long-standing reality that's been disrupted by colonization. This understanding is what's central to the land back movement. To give an example, I think I want to look at the term Turtle Island. It's a term used by indigenous peoples for North America and shows a lot about the different ways we look about it. North America is a colonial term named after a colonizer. Turtle Island, which stems from creation myths from various indigenous nations around this continent, talks about the continent as if it is a living, breathing creature that we have a reciprocal relationship with. If anything, it's one of those small things that shows that there are people who have a profound connection to this land. The land back movement seeks to reclaim territories through various means, including legal battles, with an aim to restore sovereignty and reconnect with their ancestral territory. It's a journey to heal deep, historic wounds caused by colonization. However, there is resistance. Some people claim that land back means eviction for non-indigenous people, which is a gross misinterpretation, a continuity of the long-standing oversight of indigenous perspectives. But maybe we should actually consider those indigenous perspectives. Like, for example, the description of land back that comes from indigenous activist Jesse Wente. His view of the land back movement is that it's about building self-determination and resource autonomy for indigenous nations. An idea that communities could flourish independently, no longer dependent or colonized by the settler colonial states. And then we have, on the flip side, people like no, I told myself I wasn't going to say his name in this video. You have commentators stirring the pot with their 5 minutes of Wikipedia research who spout that land back is synonymous with ethnic cleansing and genocide, an absolutely wild misinterpretation of a movement deeply rooted in all things healing and reconciliation. So let me be straight with you. That misinterpretation spinning around on like Twitch and stuff is why I made this video. The amount of misinformation about land back is basically the result of a few people who have a gigantic audience and do zero research, but because they portray confidence, act like an asshole, and display a performative lack of empathy, a certain demographic of young white guy think they're geniuses. I call this the Rick Sanchez effect. These people then send influenced people on a harassment campaign against indigenous activists, as well as a lot of other conspicuously non-white and non-male people to attack them based on a portrayal of their position, again, put together by a guy who, again, did zero research before running his mouth. And the kind of people who are convinced by that kind of person probably need a guy who looks like this to say this information to them so that they'll take it seriously. And that makes me a little mad because, as I said, land back is about healing. It's about understanding and confronting hard truths. And so I'm here to dive deep into what land back really means. And I'm not going to do that by browbeating some woman of color in a Twitch verbal WWE match that we're all just pretending is a debate. This movement is steeped in history. It has rich cultural depth, and it's driven by the most base need of all communities, a quest for self-determination. It's a mosaic of stories, struggles, and triumphs that need to be fully acknowledged and appreciated. So stay with me as we delve into this story. I'm committed to presenting you with the unvarnished truth as well as I can say it, because it's a story worth telling. So to get started, this continent, for tens of thousands of years, was all indigenous land, vibrant with culture and life. Then the Fire Nation of the world, Europeans, arrived. Colonialism marked this violent period of invasion and domination that stripped indigenous peoples of their ancestral lands and eroded their cultural identities. As they lost control over their ways of life, these communities, the ones that weren't just exterminated or died of European diseases anyway, faced systematic discrimination and marginalization, leading to ongoing cycles of poverty, loss of language, loss of culture, systematic racism. These legacies of colonialism persist today, deeply impacting indigenous communities, from economic inequalities to an alarming number of missing and murdered indigenous women and girls in Canada. In the years since Columbus inflicted himself upon this rock, Europeans have been violently invading indigenous lands. It was true in 1492, and it still happens today. On top of stealing land, these colonizers imposed their values, laws, and control, leading to a systematic dispossession of indigenous peoples from their ancestral territories they lived on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, deeply connected to their way of life. In the US, the Native American reservation system began as an illusion of independence, but was nothing but a tool for ethnic cleansing. Up north in Canada, unfair or just dishonored treaties often resulted in large areas of land being transferred to the crown. A polite way of saying, thanks for the land. Here, have some barely habitable scraps in return. We'll be back to start polluting your water so that you can't drink it without boiling it in a few decades or so. And that's not even getting into the systematic cultural genocide known as the residential school system. Here in Canada, Indigenous children were forced from their families and communities to be forcibly converted to Christianity and indoctrinated into Western culture violently. That's not even mentioning the horrific abuse and the shocking body count these houses of horror started to rack up. Established in the 1880s and operating until the 1990s, these schools were a Canadian government and church initiative aimed at assimilating Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture. Over 150,000 children were uprooted from their homes, their identities stripped away as they were dressed in uniforms, their hair was cut short, and they were forced into rigid schedules designed to sever their family ties. The schooling was rudimentary, focused on menial labor skills, with children often suffering from malnourishment, harsh discipline, and even sexual and physical abuse. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada has labeled this as a cultural genocide, a deliberate attempt to erase Indigenous cultures and languages from the earth. Today, we still see the echoes of this trauma, from the 60s scoop to ongoing struggles with poverty, education, and health in Indigenous communities. If you're interested in learning more about this dark chapter in Canadian history, but American history too, I actually made a detailed video about the residential school system that you can watch somewhere. And land. Why are we talking so much about land? Well, historians and Indigenous people will point out that land to Indigenous people is the core of their identity, spirituality, and life itself. For many of these communities, the land is seen, as I said, a living, breathing entity that is entwined with their very existence. It's not so much an ownership thing as it is a profound spiritual and cultural connection where many of them see that they belong to the land, not the other way around. To them, land is a source of life, it's sustenance, and it's the home of their ancestral spirits. And because of this, many Indigenous people feel that they have a responsibility to care for the land and honor it. This bond shows up in their traditions, their rituals, and their oral histories, making it an integral part of their cultural heritage. Now, it sounds kind of vague, but what it means that to Indigenous culture, their knowledge base on how to exist in the world is deeply tied to the very specific places they lived. Every hill, every tree, every animal has very specific cultural importance. And so if we look at the history, we can clearly see that land back is rooted in a tradition of Indigenous resistance against this theft that never ended. It's as old as the colonial forces that they had been countering. From the moment that European boots set foot on Turtle Island, Indigenous people have been fighting back, defending their rights, their territories, and their way of life as it's been under attack from all sides. As an example, let's delve into a chapter of history that resonates right in my backyard. The story of Tecumseh's Confederacy, which left a saga of resistance and unity that unfolded right here in the Great Lakes region. Spearheaded by the Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet, or Tenskwatawa, this Confederacy was a coalition, but also a bold stance against the onslaught of European settlers that were encroaching into this land. It was rooted in a vision that they could create an independent Native American nation. Tecumseh's Confederacy became a rallying point for many nations, including the Seneca, Wyandot, and the Six Nations. They united in a quest to preserve whatever they could hold on to. Tecumseh was a very charismatic person, and he had strong convictions that galvanized a movement, especially significant considering that there were many different nations being brought together. And I can't even regularly get my D&D group together, so this Confederacy's resistance was quite impressive. This Confederacy's resistance culminated in Tecumseh's War and later on their alliance with the British during the War of 1812. But unfortunately, this was cut short at the Battle of the Thames, based on a river that's literally runs through my town, and this battle happened not too far from here in London, Ontario, and marked a pivotal moment in Indigenous resistance. Tecumseh died in this battle, and it was a devastating blow that fractured the Confederacy in 1813, But what Tecumseh stood for, unity in the face of overwhelming odds and the fight for self-determination, remains a powerful legacy that carries onwards to this very day. Moving forward in time a little bit, there are a few events as harrowing yet emblematic as the Long Walk of the Navajo in the 1860s. The Long Walk was less like when you miss the bus by 30 seconds and you're already late for work, and more like an outright act of ethnic cleansing by the US government. Imagine over 8,500 Navajo people, men, women, children, uprooted from their ancestral homes in Arizona and New Mexico, only to face a brutal 300-mile trek to the Bosque Redondo Reservation. This journey was marked by starvation and exposure, which claimed the lives of at least 200 souls. This dark episode began as U.S. settlers and military forces encroached on Navajo lands. Under Major General James H. Carleton's orders, Christopher Carson, known as Kit, launched a scorched earth campaign, burning Navajo villages, killing livestock, and cutting off water sources in a desert, might I add, effectively cornering the Navajo into desperation. But that's not the full story. They had a resilience and a determination that one day they would return to their lands, and did so in an extremely rare legal victory in 1868 with a treaty that gave them some of their territory back, and many Navajo went home. Today, the Long Walk lives on in the collective memory of the Navajo, symbolizing that enduring resistance against colonization and cultural erasure can have victories. It's also a reminder of the brutal tactics used in the American conquest of the West, and underscores the ongoing struggle of indigenous peoples to reclaim and protect their ancestral territory. In the context of the Land Back movement, this incident shows that even the legal fight to get their land back has roots in as far back as the 1800s, if not further. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we're going to find the emergence of something called the American Indian Movement, which I'm going to call AIM for the rest of this video because that I word is kind of a slur here in Canada. But AIM quickly came onto the scene and became a pivotal force in the continuum of indigenous resistance and the roots of the Land Back movement. Founded in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1968 by community activists like George Mitchell, Dennis Banks, and Klein Belcour, AIM was a response to this legacy of discrimination and harmful federal policies. From its inception, AIM tackled systematic issues like poverty, discrimination, and police brutality, especially those faced by American indigenous people uprooted by government programs and living in urban areas. Very much took a leaf out of the ongoing civil rights movement. However, AIM's scope soon broadened, grappling with a myriad of issues born from settler colonialism. They wanted recognition of indigenous treaties, sovereignty, protection of Native American rights, economic independence, cultural revitalization, and autonomy over their tribal lands. Crucially, AIM fought for the restoration of land that they asserted were unjustly taken, which I would argue is all of it, but whatever. AIM has been instrumental in fostering cultural renewal, creating housing programs, job training centers, and legal aid, continuing to advocate for justice and better conditions for Native Americans. It's a chapter in the larger story of indigenous resistance and their determination to get autonomy over themselves and the land they feel attached to. Also in the 1960s, after AIM's emergence, we had a pivotal moment in the struggle for indigenous rights unfolding with the occupation of Alcatraz. As dawn broke on November 20th, 1969, a determined group of Native American students and activists united under the banner of the Indians of All Tribes, IOAT, and set their sights on a symbol of isolation and decay, Alcatraz Island. Led by figures like Richard Oakes and Lanata Means, with John Trudel's voice resonating as their spokesman, they claimed this abandoned rock in San Francisco Bay, invoking the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie. Their message was clear. This land, once a federal penitentiary and long neglected, rightfully belonged to the native people. Their vision for Alcatraz was transformative. They wanted to turn it into a center for native history, a place of ecological restoration, job training, and spirituality. The occupation lasted 19 months and became a living protest, a beacon shining light on the ongoing oppression of Native Americans. They established a broadcast station right in the main cell block and used it to broadcast pirate radio signals, giving their voice reach far beyond the cold walls of the island, which stirred a movement across the nation. The whole country was looking at Alcatraz, wondering what would happen, and every day they kept doing it, it was drawing more and more attention to the issues that Native Americans were facing. Yet, this journey was not without hardship. They grappled with leadership struggles, they faced the tragic loss of a child, and constant government attempts to break their spirit by cutting power and allowing fires to ravage historic buildings. But their resolve only grew stronger. The only thing that caused the occupation's end was not surrender, but forced removal by armed federal marshals, FBI agents, and special forces police on June 11th, 1971. But let's be clear, the occupation was far from a defeat. The occupation of Alcatraz ignited a wildfire of activism, drawing national and international attention to the plight of Native Americans, and became a catalyst for change, sparking significant shifts in federal policies, and breathed new life into the fight for indigenous rights. Because it wouldn't be the last occupation. The momentum soon found a new and dramatic focal point in the Wounded Knee incident in 1973. The 71-day occupation of Wounded Knee, South Dakota by AIM and the Oglala Lakota Nation was a symbolic reoccupation of a site steeped in tragedy. Because on that site in 1890, U.S. Army troops perpetrated the Wounded Knee Massacre, one of the worst acts of mass violence against indigenous peoples in American history, which is saying a lot. The massacre decimated hundreds of Lakota people and marked a grim end to native armed resistance against white settlers. So as you can guess, the 1973 occupation had layers of profound significance and was a pretty bold statement against the corruption in tribal leadership and the chronic neglect of native treaties by the US government. The choice of Wounded Knee resonated pretty well with the memories of resistance and loss and transformed it into a call for the return of traditional tribal lands and the assertion of indigenous rights. Despite the fierce opposition by US Marshals and FBI agents, the occupiers held their ground, turning Wounded Knee into a symbol of resilience and another beacon for the indigenous rights movement worldwide. When the occupation ended on May 8th, 1973, with the occupiers surrendering, it marked not a defeat, but a turning point. This occupation galvanized the movement and built an indigenous rights movement across the US. It brought international attention to the historic and ongoing injustices faced by Native Americans. The Wounded Knee incident also sparked a cultural and spiritual revival. Inside the besieged town, traditional religious ceremonies were conducted, and many people there reported feeling a rekindling of their sense of identity and community. The occupation was a message to the world that the struggle for indigenous sovereignty was far from over. Now, I know that I'm skipping over a whole lot of very important incidents in indigenous resistance throughout the, basically through the 15th century through today, but I wanted to make sure that I hit a few of the big hits to show you that this is not a new phenomenon. Following the Wounded Knee incident, I'll talk about another one that I thought was pretty important because Canada deserves a role in this, and this is one that I learned about in Canadian history class, and I was technically alive for it, so there is that. And it happened in Quebec, which makes it a little bit more interesting. It was called the Oka Crisis, which almost all Canadians would be able to mention to you, but most Americans probably haven't heard of it. It was a 78-day standoff in Oka, Quebec, and another statement that there was an ongoing struggle for indigenous rights over land. During this occupation, the Mohawk people of Kanesatake took a firm stance against a proposed expansion of a golf course with townhouses on a site that was a sacred burial ground to them. A tangible connection, a very literal example for one of the reasons why indigenous people care so much about their ancestral territories. This crisis was rooted in a centuries-old land dispute that stretched all the way back to 1761 over the seigneury of the Lake of Two Mountains. The Mohawks blockade, a completely legitimate direct response, quickly escalated into a national issue. When an incident led to the death of a member of La Ficaille, oink oink, the standoff intensified with the Canadian government, where they eventually deployed the troops, a move that underscored the gravity of the conflict. The Oka crisis concluded on September 26, 1990, with the cancellation of the expansion and the federal government's purchase of the land. Yet, the resolution was still incomplete. The land was never actually returned to the Mohawks. This unresolved dispute stands as a stark reminder of the challenges indigenous peoples face in reclaiming their territories. Because even though they won the crisis by not having a golf course built on the graves of their ancestors, holy shit, the Canadian government still just wouldn't give it back to them. It'd be so fucking easy to just do that. Holy shit, man. Canada. To say that the Oka crisis had a large impact in Canada is a little bit of an understatement. It was basically anything anyone could talk about. Canada launched a royal commission, which is the thing, just spoiler alert, when the Canadian government doesn't want to actually do anything, but wants to appear like they are doing something. That's royal commission time. But the Oka crisis definitely resonated pretty hard with the indigenous peoples of Canada. And to this day, it is still very close to the surface for a lot of people, especially the Mohawk who live around Montreal. And again, showed that these people, as stewards, protectors of their land and occupying it, was going to be an ongoing thing. Which reminds me of another one that's a little bit more recent and might have at least some living memories for some of you. The Keystone XL pipeline protests, a defining moment in the evolution of the land back movement. It began as a fierce opposition to a project that threatened indigenous territories and their environment because they were building an oil pipeline through their sacred land that risked their water sources and the livelihoods of many indigenous communities. Specifically, you could look at the pipeline proposal and it went around white communities and intentionally went through places where it would mess up indigenous water supplies. Many indigenous communities, notably the Standing Rock Sioux, stood at the forefront of these protests, setting up camps and prayer circles. Their voice became a resounding call against the erosion of their treaty rights and colonialist legacy that was literally unfolding in front of the entire world's eyes. In Canada, we had a similar situation with the Wet'suwet'en protests in British Columbia, which had similar themes of people fighting for sovereignty and environmental stewardship. The Wet'suwet'en Nation, which never ceded their land to Canada, stood against the construction of oil gas pipelines called the Coastal GasLink pipeline over 22,000 square kilometers of their territory. This barrier of people protecting their ancestral lands and the RCMP, the Canadian Federal Police, coming in and violently removing indigenous people from their lands so they could build a fucking pipeline through it, was something that I would say put into sharp focus the ongoingness of colonial encroachment, and that there was never going to be a sort of pathway of working with the Canadian government and making a deal. Their response highlighted that there were still many systematic issues prevalent in Canadian society, and that the only thing that they could do to make any gains was to establish sovereignty. They needed to no longer be dependent on the Canadian government. They needed to have control over their own resources and take care of themselves, because none of the settler colonial states were ever going to do it. These events, along with many others, culminated in the birth of the Land Back movement, which was introduced in 2018 by Arnell Tailfeathers, a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy. When he introduced the term, it quickly became a trending hashtag. Then a rallying call for indigenous communities in the United States and Canada. The Land Back movement had one very clear goal: reestablishing indigenous sovereignty, pushing for a return to communal land ownership, and to challenge the colonial narratives of land and even the concept of ownership. On Indigenous Peoples Day in 2020, the NDN Collective officially launched the Land Back campaign with the manifesto, The Reclamation of everything stolen from the original peoples. The land back movement has since then become a pivotal element of indigenous politics, embodying the struggle for justice, environmental stewardship, and the return of national sovereignty. It's a movement that transcends borders, unites indigenous peoples and their shared history of resistance in an unyielding quest for a future where their rights, culture, and land are fully recognized and respected. Today, indigenous resistance in Canada and the United States has evolved into a multifaceted struggle that transcends the traditional confines of protest. These methods are often spearheaded by indigenous organizations and movements. Their actions have resulted in heroic standoffs against settler colonial states. The courtroom has become another battlefield for indigenous communities. Here they have asserted their rights, challenged land seizures and violations of their treaties. In Canada, the major legal effort has been to demand the government do an inquiry into the, as I said earlier, shockingly high number of missing and murdered indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ+ people. This particular push also shows the limits of the legal movement because despite Trudeau's strongest of pinky promises, this inquiry has yet to result in much at all. Indigenous people have also been at the forefront of environmental stewardship, and their contributions in this area have been profound. Critical even. Their environmental efforts are deeply rooted in having a rich heritage and a deep traditional knowledge of the lands that they're trying to protect. This knowledge has been passed down through generations and is a testament to having an intimate understanding of local ecosystems and a long-stead tradition of sustainable land use. It encompasses strategies for maintaining environmental balance, ensures vital resources like water, fertile soil, and biodiversity are preserved for future generations. In environmental restoration terms, the stewardship is called traditional ecological knowledge, or TEC. It's a comprehensive body of wisdom that includes sustainable practices in agriculture, hunting, fishing, and forestry, as well as biodiversity conservation and ecosystem health maintenance. They have these knowledge systems that are inextricably linked to very specific cultural and spiritual beliefs, and it emphasizes that they keep a reciprocal relationship with the land that they live on and treat it with respect and reverence. So very often, indigenous communities find themselves active in environmental sustainability, environmentalism protests, and oftentimes do way better than even most conservationists when it's just handed over to them. Because indigenous communities view environmental stewardship as a holistic approach, they integrate their cultural values and their spiritual connections to the land in their everyday management practices. This perspective shows a deep-rooted commitment to environmental conservation and offers valuable lessons to how we can be sustainable in other contexts. And we've had a lot of success incorporating indigenous knowledge into broader environmental management and conservation strategies. By recognizing and integrating these perspectives and practices, we can work towards a more sustainable, equitable future where the health of our planet and its diverse ecosystems are maintained through the wisdom and stewardship of its original caretakers. This approach aligns with studies showing that lands under indigenous protection often exhibit remarkable success in maintaining and enhancing biodiversity, further underscoring the crucial role of indigenous knowledge in global environmental stewardship. But of course, we can't forget the struggle to regain lost land. Asserting sovereignty over their territories remains a cornerstone of indigenous resistance. Despite facing repression, surveillance, and criminalization, indigenous communities continue to resist resource development that exploits their lands. While there has been some progress with governments adopting the United Nations guidelines for heightened indigenous sovereignty, the fight is far from over. Indigenous communities continue to battle for their basic human rights, clean water, access to their territory, and equitable healthcare. And given that these people have been fighting for centuries, it truly is a testament to their resilience and an unsettling reminder that colonization perpetuates every day. But land back has not just been a story of struggle. There have been significant victories and inspiring progress. Recent years have seen tangible, heartening successes in the movement's journey towards re-establishing indigenous sovereignty and control over ancestral lands. So let me put on my best PLN voice for this one. In a landmark moment, June 2022 saw the Boisfort Band of Chippewa reclaim a huge part of their land. In fact, it was the largest land back agreement in American history. Further east, New York State witnessed a historic return of over 1,000 acres to the Onondaga Nation in July of 2022. Massive, unprecedented victories, thousands of acres. April 2022 marked a collaboration between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and conservationists, leading to 465 acres of land being returned to the Rappahannock Nation in Virginia. This, along with the removal of dams along the Klamath River in Oregon, which was a long-term effort by the Yurok Nation and other environmental activists, it all illustrates that there's a common good to returning land to indigenous stewardship for environmental conservation. It's a far cry from the genocidal ethnic cleansing campaign debate bros want to paint it as.
Governments are beginning to understand that they have treaty obligations to the Six Nations and to the Onondaga Nation, and that's a very, very positive development.
But the gem on top of this entire thing is the McGirt decision, a cornerstone of all of these recent victories. It reestablished the reservations of the Five Nations in eastern Oklahoma, an amount of territory that encompassed an impressive 19 million acres. Million. That is half of Oklahoma. On top of that, it's larger than the nation of Lebanon and the nation of Cyprus. The Supreme Court decision reaffirmed indigenous jurisdiction over this humongous region. We've seen similarly returns of large amounts of land in Big Sur, California to the Asellan Nation, and in Oakland, California to the East Bay Ohlone Nation. There's actually a really cool ArcGIS project that I'll link in the description that shows all of the land-backed victories that are piling up every day. And it's very encouraging because a lot of these victories are very recent, like 2020's recent. The land back movement is picking up steam and it's winning more victories all the time. Each decision paving a way for a future where indigenous sovereignty is respected and honored. Every acre returned is a step towards decolonization and the dismantling of a legacy of white supremacy. This history, as I read it, changed something in me. As many of you know, I have an almost 2-year-old who's literally sleeping in the next room, so I have to be more quiet. And he too, without any choice or knowledge, has been born into this painful legacy. I owe it to him and the many generations after him to do something. I, like you, live in a world of one horrific revelation to the next. The coming decades will be defined by degrees of warming, environmental catastrophe, and a deepening sense of mourning for the biosphere of this tiny mote of dust in the endless cosmos. It's not hard to sink into doomerism, but land back. These stories give me a weird feeling in my heart that almost feels like hope. The many crimes that led to me living here, to my very existence, does have another side. Not forgiveness necessarily, but some sort of healing from one of the greatest horrors in human history. In a way that if we do survive this ecological collapse, we'll have indigenous people with their connection to the land to thank for it. Land back is a moral imperative, restoring balance to a relationship that has been one-sided for far too long. Each story of land reclamation is a chapter in a larger narrative of resilience and hope. This journey has reinforced my commitment to help this cause in whatever way I can. Action is necessary, whether it's amplifying indigenous voices, supporting legal battles, or advocating for policy changes. I've learned that we all have a role to play in supporting indigenous sovereignty and self-determination. Hopefully, this video gets some of you to get involved too. There is a path forward. I'm also struck by the enduring strength and spirit of indigenous communities. Their fight for land back is a testament to an unwavering determination. For me, it's been an eye-opening journey, one that has changed how I see this land, its history, and its future. But this narrative isn't unique to North America. Around the world, similar struggles echo the same call for justice and restoration. Take, for example, the Palestinian people. Like the indigenous communities of North America, Palestinians have faced a horrific and ongoing campaign of dispossession and displacement. And they are currently undergoing a horrifying, genocidal campaign by the hardline Israeli government. One that has been going on for decades. In my next video, I'm going to delve deeper into Palestinian history, but today we're focusing on the right of return. This concept is a cornerstone of the Palestinian struggle, rooted in a series of historical events that led to widespread displacement. The right of return asserts that Palestinian refugees, including both those who were directly displaced and their descendants, have a legitimate claim to return to their homes and properties in what is now Israel and the Palestinian territories. This principle was first articulated by United Nations mediator Folke Bernadotte in 1948. The historical context of this principle stems from two key events: the mass displacement during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, also known as the Nakba, and the subsequent displacement caused by the 1967 Six-Day War. These conflicts led to a humongous refugee crisis, with estimates suggesting that as of 2012, about 30,000 to 50,000 first-generation refugees are still alive, alongside approximately 5 million of their descendants. Proponents of the right to return view it as a fundamental human right, supported by international law. The right of return remains a highly contentious issue in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For Palestinians, it symbolizes a crucial aspect of justice and redress for displacement. And I'm sure this won't surprise you, but despite United Nations General Assembly Resolution 194 affirming this right, it remains unimplemented, continuing to be a major hurdle in peace negotiations and a central element in the narratives of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's because Israel just refuses to listen to the United Nations. The land back movement in North America and the Palestinian right of return share common ground in their fight against historical injustices. Both movements are about identity, culture, and a deep connection to a place. However, they operate within different contexts and face unique challenges. The land back movement focuses on indigenous sovereignty and environmental stewardship, while the Palestinian movement contends with complex political and geopolitical issues, like Israel basically trying to eradicate their entire population off the face of the earth. Now, as we witness the land back movement making strides, this is a reminder that this is a universal struggle for land rights and dignity, a struggle that transcends borders and connects different people in a quest for justice and recognition. So then, what is everybody on Twitch complaining about? Let's clear the air about some myths about land back. First, it's not about giving land back in the strictest sense of the word within the confines of US law. This movement transcends the notion of mere stewardship under current property law. It's about decolonizing the entire idea of owning land and acknowledging indigenous ownership in a way that dismantles the centuries-old narrative of Christian discovery. Decolonizing the land in this context means actively reversing the legacy of settler colonialism by restoring indigenous sovereignty and rights over their traditional territories. Jake Edwards put it aptly: the land never left. It's about recognizing the continuity of indigenous presence and rights. Another myth is that the land back means some sort of ethnic cleansing campaign of everyone who isn't indigenous. This misconception may be propagated by individuals or groups that view the land back movement as a threat to their own land ownership or political power, or who interpret the call for the return of land to indigenous peoples as implying the expulsion of non-indigenous people, or they just don't do a whole lot of work and make lazy content because they stream 8 hours a day. Their takes are far from the truth. This is not about genocide or mass displacement. In urban settings, for instance, it could mean about creating a cultural space for indigenous communities, or something as simple as supporting local nations through voluntary contributions. It's about making a harmonious system of coexistence and respect, not exclusion. Let's maybe stop thinking that indigenous people with autonomy and power will act like we would. It also probably destroys the idea that the land back movement excludes people of colonial descent. Exclusion's not what this movement is about at all. It's not just for indigenous people. It's a mission and an objective that's about public good, and it could very well save the existence of life on Earth. This is about addressing historical injustice and promoting self-determination. We should recognize indigenous peoples and their ancestral lands and find ways for all communities to honor and support this rightful claim in a way where we can all coexist peacefully. Now, there are people not on the internet who have some more grounded concerns. Some argue about the practicality of returning lands. How do you hand back vast tracts, especially privately owned ones, they might ask? And yeah, that's a complex question. One big problem is that the existing legal framework has been structured over centuries to take away indigenous land. And it's coupled with the fact that land costs a lot of money and that a lot of tribes don't have a lot of money. However, there are proposed solutions that involve focusing on the return of public lands, which are often just leased out to resource extraction companies. Also, we could look about doing legal reforms so that we can get rid of current structures that, limit indigenous control over areas and broaden the movement's objectives to include environmental sustainability and climate action. These approaches aim to dismantle the concept of it being some sort of real estate purchase, which is very much from a colonial perspective, and more talk about sovereignty and treaty recognition. But this is also not going to be one big victory. It's going to be one bit by bit through legal victories. It's like eating an elephant. You just have to take it one bite at a time. It also seems kind of weird because I don't think that we would be hemming and hawing this much about any other kind of stolen property. Some people also worry that the land back movement breeds divisiveness. Critics fear that focusing on past injustice might prevent society from moving forward, deepening divisions rather than healing them. But social psychology has well demonstrated that without some kind of acknowledgement and restitution, all you'll ever do in such a situation is sow the seeds of resentment and contempt. Without making amends and beginning a process of healing with these nations, we will always sit with this injustice dangling over our heads. Plus, a lot of these injustices written off as historical aren't that historical. Violation of indigenous sovereignty still happens today if the settler colonial state decides that they just want to build an oil pipeline through their land, for example. Another thing that comes up for criticism is land acknowledgements. Some dismiss them as empty gestures, a feel-good exercise that doesn't lead to substantial change. Land acknowledgements or territorial acknowledgements are formal statements that recognize the original indigenous peoples of a particular land, often spoken at the start of public events. I sort of did one at the beginning of this video, for example. Why are so many people these days so prickly about the idea of showing different groups of people respect? Their purpose is to do that, show respect and affirm that this is an ongoing relationship between the indigenous people and the land that you're standing upon. It's a reminder of indigenous histories and experiences, often overlooked or forgotten, and it's a practice rooted in centuries-old traditions among Native nations. While they acknowledge the past, they are equally about recognizing the present and the impact of ongoing colonization. However, it's crucial to understand that acknowledgements alone are not sufficient. They should really be part of a larger commitment to building equitable relationships. And I think it does us well to be reminded time and time again that the land we stand upon is one that we do not really have a rightful claim to. It struck me that the resistance to land back often stems from a place of discomfort with change, a reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths about our history, and acknowledge that this is a process we are still in the middle of, and one that we can stop. As I peeled back these layers of misconceptions and challenged my own preconceptions, I realized that land back is not only a political movement, but a moral and ecological necessity. It's about restoring balance, honoring agreements and treaties that we made, and acknowledging that the sovereignty of indigenous peoples, and not so much giving back as it is recognizing something that they always had to begin with. I've come to see that land back is about creating a future where respect, coexistence, and ecological stewardships are the foundation of our relationship with the earth and with each other. It's a challenging path for sure, but it is, I think, one of the few that leads to a world where the human species survives. Capitalism is at its core the ideology of colonialism, focused on constant expansion into natural commons and mulching it into products. If we don't decolonize our societies, we have no hope of undoing the ideology that accelerates us off the cliff into extinction. We need to grapple with our lack of appreciation for land rights and our very real connection with history. Land rights, conflicts, history, it's all a very complex thing. Luckily, there are great educators out there talking about land rights and conflicts in a way that makes it easy to grasp how history and the present are closer neighbors than you think. One of the best is the series Modern Conflicts by the Real Life Lore team. This series doesn't just give you snippets of events like when you follow the news day to day. It dives deep into the geopolitical chessboard of the world. I always walk away from an episode feeling like I really get the idea of an unfolding event where the news kind of just gives you fractured glimpses. It's a way to take a step back and take it all in. And while we're at it, let's not forget, Modern Conflicts is a Nebula original, and this is where Nebula shines. It's a place for well-researched, credible content. Modern Conflicts is a prime example, offering perspectives on land and sovereignty conflicts you won't find elsewhere. This December, Nebula is offering lifetime memberships for $300, but this price tag represents an investment in education and supporting content that goes beyond the superficial. And if you're looking for a unique gift for the holiday season, why not give the gift of knowledge with a lifetime membership, because we're selling them as gifts. Christmas! Nebula is a haven for creators who push boundaries. Big Joel, Tom Nicholas, Jesse Gender, they're all there, crafting content that challenges and grows our understanding. And speaking of Jesse Gender, next year, she has an upcoming film called Identities. It's a movie that explores the concept of identity in a corporate metaverse type thing. And it's only going to be on Nebula. It just shows that Nebula has a commitment to unique storytelling and things that come from a community of visionary creators. But there's a change you should know about. The Curiosity Stream bundle you might have heard about in previous bits on this channel is ending. Many of you joined the bundle to access Nebula and support creators like ours. However, Curiosity Stream's latest moves, as revealed in their SEC filings, indicate that they won't be sharing any revenue from the bundle with us in 2024, even for ongoing accounts. To continue supporting the content and creators you love directly, maybe consider switching to a direct Nebula subscription. If you switch from the bundle, your direct subscription starts only after your bundle access expires. So, are you then ready to explore Nebula? Just click the link in the description, the pinned comment, or scan the QR code if you're on a TV, and you'll find everything you need there to start with Modern Conflicts and lots of other incredible content. So click on it and dive in. After you finish this video, of course. Join us on Nebula. It's about being part of a community that values depth, diversity, and challenging narratives. I'll see you there. What began as a mere curiosity has transformed into a fervent support for a cause that's not inherently indigenous, but human. Because I'm about to say a thing that shows why I couldn't make it as a debate bro. Empathy and understanding should be our main guides here and in pretty much everything. Opposition to this act of restitution and justice reveals deeper layers of fear, misunderstanding, and resistance to change. But when we truly listen, when we truly seek to understand those barriers, begin to crumble, giving way to a shared human vision of justice and restoration. I've been privileged to tell you all this story today. We, as settlers, should support their cause, not only in words, but in deeds. Attend their events, acknowledge their land, support their legal battles. Help create spaces where indigenous cultures can thrive. Let's once and for all unburden ourselves of this lasting injustice. It's good for the soul.